Before you decide what you think about what I'm about to say, I need you to listen for just a few minutes. What I'm sharing didn't come easily. It took me 75 years to understand it. And I promise you, it doesn't matter whether you pray every day, pray sometimes, or don't pray at all. This matters to you, and my name is Margaret. I'm 75 years old. And my entire life, whether I realized it or not, I've been wrestling with one quiet but powerful question. What do I actually believe? I grew up in a household where religion wasn't a suggestion. It was a rule. Sunday mornings were non-negotiable. We were in church every single week, sitting in the same pews, listening to the same hymns, following the same routines. My father was a deacon, respected and admired in our community. My mother taught Sunday school and had a gentle way of speaking that made everything sound certain and safe. I memorized Bible verses before I could properly tie my shoes. Faith was something handed to me fully formed, like an inheritance I never questioned. Back then, belief felt simple,
Clean.
predictable. There were clear answers for everything, printed neatly in black and white. And if doubts ever appeared, they weren't discussed. You didn't say them out loud. You learned early that some questions were better left unasked. When you're young, certainty feels comforting. It gives you structure. It tells you who you are and where you belong. And for a long time, I believed that certainty was faith. But here's what nobody tells you when you're young. Life doesn't care how certain you are. Life doesn't arrive politely, fitting itself into the answers you were given as a child. It shows up messy and unpredictable. It asks questions your beliefs weren't prepared to answer. When I was 23 years old, life cracked something open inside me. My best friend died in a car accident. She was kind in a way I wasn't. She helped people without being asked. She had a laugh that made you feel like everything would be okay. And then, in an instant, she was gone. I remember standing at her funeral, listening to the familiar words about God's plan, about a better place, about everything happening for a reason. Everyone around me nodded, comforted by phrases they'd heard their entire lives. But inside me, something shifted. I wasn't sad in the way people expected. I was angry. Angry because none of it made sense anymore. Angry because the answers that once felt so solid suddenly felt thin and fragile. I looked at the coffin and thought, if this is part of a plan, I don't understand it. That anger scared me. It felt dangerous to question something I had been taught was unshakable. But once the questions started, they didn't stop. And for the first time, I allowed myself to ask real questions, not the kind where you already know the acceptable answer, but the kind that keep you awake at night. That was the beginning of a long, quiet journey. A journey I didn't talk about much. A journey that would take decades, that I still went to church. I still prayed the prayers I had memorized as a child. But something had changed. The certainty was gone. And in its place was curiosity, fear, and an uncomfortable honesty I didn't yet know how to handle. Looking back now, I realized something important. That moment didn't weaken my faith. It made me human, because belief that has never been questioned is fragile. And life has a way of testing everything you think you know. At 23, I didn't have the language for what I was feeling. All I knew was that the world was bigger, more mysterious, and far less predictable than I had been taught. And whether I liked it or not, I had stepped onto a path where easy answers no longer worked. I didn't know it then, but that moment would shape the next 50 years of my life. And this was only the beginning. After my friend died, something inside me refused to go back to sleep. On the outside, my life looked the same. I still showed up to church on Sundays. I still bowed my head at the right moments. I still said amen when everyone else did. But inside, I was no longer listening for answers. I was listening for honesty. What surprised me most was how lonely questioning felt. And no one tells you that when you begin to doubt, you don't lose faith all at once. You lose language first. You don't know how to explain what you're feeling without sounding ungrateful, rebellious, or broken. So I stayed quiet. I smiled. I nodded. And I carried my questions alone. That I end my late 20s and early 30s. I started reading. Not to prove anyone wrong, not to replace what I'd been taught, but to understand. I read the Bible again, slowly this time, without rushing to conclusions. I noticed things I had never noticed before. Contradictions, poetry, rage, compassion, mystery. Then I kept going. I read the Quran. I read Buddhist teachings. I explored Hindu philosophy. I even read writers who didn't believe in God at all. At first, I felt guilty, like I was doing something forbidden. But something unexpected happened. I didn't lose my faith, I lost my fear. Every tradition I studied held a piece of something real. None of them had the full picture, but none of them were empty either. Each one was trying, in its own language, to explain what it means to be human in a world that doesn't always make sense. About 30 years ago, I met a man at work who changed something in me forever. His name was Ahmed. He was a devout Muslim, quiet, thoughtful, deeply kind. I'll admit this with some shame. At first, I kept my distance. I had absorbed ideas growing up about what people like him believed, what they must think about people like me. One night, we were stuck late at the office finishing a project. The building was almost empty. Somewhere around 11 o'clock, conversation replaced silence. We talked about families, about exhaustion, about trying to live a good life. Then he told me about his faith. He explained the 5 pillars of Islam. He talked about prayer, not as obligation but as grounding. About charity, not as generosity, but as responsibility. About submitting not to fear, but to something greater than your own ego. As I listened, something inside me softened. Because he wasn't describing something foreign. He was describing the same longing I felt every time I prayed as a child. The same hunger for meaning. The same desire to feel connected to something beyond myself. The words were different. The rituals were different. But the ache was the same. That night changed me. It taught me that faith isn't a competition. It isn't about whose language is correct. It's about how humans across time and cultures have tried to reach toward the same mystery. Now, I know what some people assume at this point. They think I'm about to say that all religions are the same or that beliefs don't matter. That's not what I'm saying. The differences matter. They matter because they represent different ways of understanding something enormous and unknowable. Different maps for the same terrain. But what mattered more to me, what still matters more, was what kept appearing again and again beneath the surface. Love people, help people, be humble. Don't be cruel. Admit you don't have all the answers. I started seeing religion less as a rule book and more as a mirror. It didn't tell me who God was as much as it showed me who I was becoming, but with that clarity came heartbreak too. Because the deeper I looked, the more I saw how often religion had been used to wound instead of heal. I saw families torn apart over belief. I saw young people punished for asking honest questions. I saw kindness replaced by certainty, compassion replaced by control, and every time I thought the same thing. This isn't what any of this was meant for. By the time I reached my 40s, I was no longer searching for certainty. I was searching for integrity. I wanted my beliefs, whatever they were, to make me gentler, not harder. More curious, not more afraid. I didn't have answers yet. But I had learned something vital. Questions weren't the enemy of faith. They were the beginning of wisdom, and I was only halfway through my journey. By the time I turned 50, I thought I had learned how to live with uncertainty. I had made peace with not having all the answers. Or at least that's what I told myself. But life has a way of testing what you think you've accepted, and on the outside, everything looked fine. I had been married for over 25 years. We had built a life together, not perfect but real. We had responsibilities, routines, and a history that tied us together in ways only time can. But quietly, underneath it all, things were unraveling. Money was tight. Stress lived in our house like an uninvited guest. Conversations turned sharp. Silences grew heavy. And, without fully realizing it, I started numbing myself. A glass of wine became two. Two became a habit. I told myself it was normal. I told myself I deserved it. But deep down, I knew I was losing my grip, that I was tired, not just physically but spiritually. Tired of pretending I was okay. Tired of being strong. Tired of carrying questions with no clear place to set them down. One night, sometime after 2 in the morning, I found myself alone in the garage. The house was silent. Everyone was asleep. I remember sitting there, surrounded by old boxes and forgotten tools, feeling smaller than I had in years. And I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I prayed. Not the kind of prayer I learned as a child. There were no memorized verses. No polished language. No confidence. I didn't even know who I was praying to. I just spoke. I said, I don't know if you're there. I don't know if you're listening. I don't even know what I believe anymore. But if there is anything real beyond me, anything at all, I need help. I can't do this alone. I waited. Nothing happened. An oh voice from heaven.
No sudden clarity. No miracle.
And honestly, part of me felt foolish for expecting anything at all. That I went to bed that night still uncertain, still exhausted, still afraid. But the next morning, something ordinary happened. And it changed everything. That a neighbor I barely knew knocked on my door. We had exchanged polite hellos for years, nothing more. He asked if I wanted to grab a coffee. Normally, I would have made an excuse. That morning, I said yes. We ended up talking for nearly 3 hours. He told me about his own struggles, with alcohol, with shame, with feeling like he was failing at life. He told me how he had gotten help. He shared resources I didn't know existed. And most importantly, he listened, really listened. Was that God? Was it coincidence? Was it simple human kindness? I still don't know. And here's the truth I didn't understand back then but do now. Maybe it doesn't matter. What mattered was that I wasn't alone anymore. Help arrived not as a miracle but as a human being showing up at the right time. That experience changed the way I understood prayer. I stopped seeing it as a transaction. Say the right words, get the right outcome. I started seeing it as an opening. A willingness to admit you don't have control. Slowly, things began to shift. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But steadily. I asked for help. I accepted support. I started being honest with my spouse, with myself, with the people around me. And as my life stabilized, something else became clearer. The older I got, the less certain I became about the details. I didn't know if there was a heaven or a hell. That I didn't know if souls were reborn or simply ended. That I didn't know which prayers were right or which day was sacred. And for the first time in my life, that uncertainty didn't terrify me, because what replaced certainty was something better. Humility. I realized the mystery was bigger than any explanation I could cling to. Bigger than any book, any building, any tradition. And maybe the most honest response to that mystery wasn't confidence. It was awe. That I began to notice something else too. People who claimed absolute certainty often seemed the least compassionate. And people who admitted they didn't know often carried the most grace. That night in the garage taught me something no sermon ever had. Faith isn't about knowing. It's about showing up, even when you're unsure, and the most meaningful answers often arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary moments. I didn't have clarity yet, but I had learned how to live without pretending, and that was a turning point. As I grew older, I began to notice patterns, not just in religion but in people. I watched how belief shaped hearts, sometimes gently, sometimes cruelly. And what I learned over time surprised me. Did I have sat in Jewish gatherings where the weight of history felt almost physical, where survival itself felt sacred. I have joined Buddhists in meditation and experienced a stillness so deep it quieted thoughts I didn't know could rest. I have worshipped with Pentecostals whose joy overflowed in ways that would have made the church of my childhood deeply uncomfortable, and in each place, I found something real, not perfect, not flawless, but genuine. Every tradition carried beauty, and every tradition carried wounds. Because religion, no matter how sacred its intentions, is still carried by human hands. That I have seen faith heal people. I have watched it pull strangers together in moments of grief. I have seen communities form around kindness, sacrifice, and service. But I have also seen faith misused, turned into a weapon rather than a refuge. That I have watched families fracture because someone married outside their tradition. I have seen teenagers rejected for asking honest questions. I have seen prejudice justified and cruelty excused, all under the banner of righteousness. And every time, it broke my heart, because none of this, not a single tradition I have studied, teaches cruelty as its highest value.
Not one.
Somewhere along the way, certainty replaced compassion. And when that happens, something sacred is lost. As I enter my 60s, I watched younger generations walking away from religion entirely. And I understood why. They saw hypocrisy. They saw judgment without humility. They saw institutions more interested in control than care. And I didn't blame them, but I wanted to say something to them. Something I wish someone had said to me earlier in life. Don't confuse broken messengers with a meaningless message. You don't have to accept everything you were taught. You don't have to stay in a tradition that starves your soul. But don't abandon the search for meaning just because someone handed you bad answers. The questions matter. The longing matters. That ache to belong to something larger than yourself. That isn't religious programming. That's human. I still attend church most Sundays. Not because I think it makes me better than anyone else. Not because I believe it earns me salvation. I go because there is something healing about gathering with others, singing together, sitting in silence together, and wrestling with meaning side by side. But my spiritual life no longer fits inside one building. That I have a Muslim friend I meet every Thursday for coffee. I read Buddhist teachings before bed. I have learned from atheists who have thought more deeply about ethics, kindness, and responsibility than many religious people I've known, and all of this has taught me one essential truth. The point isn't to be right, the point is to be open. Every person you meet is carrying a piece of the truth. And very often, the pieces that challenge you the most are the ones you need to hear. Faith, I've learned, isn't about defending a position. It's about becoming a certain kind of person. One who listens more than they speak. One who holds beliefs gently. One who understands that certainty can be comforting, but humility is transformative. As my body slowed down and my world became smaller, my sense of wonder grew larger. I stopped needing religion to give me answers. I needed it to help me ask better questions. And in doing so, something unexpected happened. I became softer. Less interested in winning arguments, less afraid of being wrong, more committed to kindness than correctness. After decades of searching, I finally understood something simple and profound. Belief only matters if it makes you more loving, and if it doesn't, something has gone terribly wrong. 3 years ago, my husband passed away. We had been married for 52 years. A lifetime, really. When you share that much time with someone, your memories begin to overlap. You don't remember where one life ends and the other begins. That I end his final weeks. We were in hospice. The room was quiet in a way that felt sacred. The machines hummed softly. Time moved differently there. One evening, as I sat beside his bed holding his hand, he looked at me and asked a question I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Do you think we'll see each other again? I wish I could tell you, I answered with certainty. I didn't. I looked at the man I had loved since my 20s, the man who had seen every version of me, and I told him the truth. I don't know, I said, but I hope so. And if there's any justice in the universe, any love at the heart of existence, then yes, I believe we will. Was that faith? Was it hope? Was it denial? I don't know. And at this point in my life, I've made peace with not knowing. What I do know is this: belief is less about what you claim and more about how you live. The most important question isn't what you believe, it's who you become because of it. If your faith makes you more loving, more compassionate, more humble, more willing to serve others, then it's doing what faith is meant to do. If it makes you cruel, judgmental, arrogant, or afraid, then something has gone wrong. No matter what label it carries, that truth crosses every boundary. Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, or none at all. Kindness doesn't belong to one tradition. Compassion isn't owned by any religion. I'm 75 years old now. If I'm lucky, I may have 10 more years, maybe less. And I'm still figuring things out. I still ask questions. I still get surprised by where I find truth and beauty, often in places I never expected, and I wouldn't have it any other way. To the younger ones listening to me now, I want you to hear this clearly. Your doubts are not a failure. Your questions are not weakness. Your search for meaning is one of the most human things about you. Don't let anyone tell you they have all the answers. The mystery is too big for that. Stay curious. Stay humble. Love people. Help people. Be kind. And keep asking the big questions, not because they guarantee answers, but because they keep your heart alive. Did I still gather with others? I still sit in silence sometimes. I still read, listen, and learn. Not because I'm searching for certainty, but because I'm learning how to live well within uncertainty. And that, I've learned, is where peace lives. If something in this story spoke to you, I hope you'll stay connected. There's a whole community here of people my age sharing what life has taught them through struggle, growth, and reflection. Maybe something we share will help you on your own journey. And if you have a story of your own, something hard-earned, something honest, don't keep it to yourself. The next voice someone needs to hear might be yours. Keep searching, keep questioning, and above all, keep being kind.